One of my friends used to tell this story about his oldest daughter, who, when she was 2 years old, they went and bought her sparkly T-strap shoes to wear to church for Easter. And she was tired when they were buying them, so she wasn't particularly receptive, but it was very important to the mom and the family that she have these sparkly shoes, and so they bought them. But the next day, Easter, when everyone woke up, the shoes were nowhere to be found. They looked everywhere, and she ended up wearing her old, beat-up tennis shoes to Easter because they couldn't find them. The mom was exasperated. The child was cranky. It didn't go well. The next day, Monday, when her dad went to work, he always took a brown paper bag lunch. So he grabbed his lunch from the fridge and went to work. And when it was time to eat, sat down with his buddies and opened up his lunch to find his daughter's sparkly shoes in the bag. When he got home that day, he went to talk to her about what had happened. And she was just 2. She didn't have all that many words. But he did finally get her to confess that she had in fact put her shoes in the bag in the refrigerator because she didn't like them. She had actually in fact told her parents where the shoes were on Saturday. She finally realized how upset they were getting that they couldn't find her new shoes. And she had told them, they're in the Switzer freezer. At that point, though, nobody knew that Switzer freezer meant refrigerator. So I guess it was a pretty safe hiding place. And they had a communication problem. Specifically, they had a communication problem because this little girl had a language problem. She did not yet have all of the words to explain that she didn't like the shoes, and therefore she had put them in the Switzer freezer. When John came to write the 4th gospel, he too had a language problem. By the time he wrote, Christianity had gone out into the Greek-speaking world. No longer was the church basically Jewish. Most church members were Gentiles. Jewish terms, which the other 3 gospels, called the synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, regularly used, simply would not be understandable to them. Matthew, Mark, and Luke speak of a Messiah who had come into the world. The Greek word they used was Christos. It means literally the anointed one. But how do you explain what that means to a Greek who is unfamiliar with the Hebrew Bible and the Jewish people's age-long yearning for a deliverer from one called the Messiah? And so John reached into the lexicon of both the Greek and Jewish traditions and called Jesus the Word, the Greek being logos of God. He wrote, as we heard, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God." And this is quite different than the other gospel writers. Mark, which we believe to be the earliest to have been written, began his gospel with the beginning of the good news of Jesus Christ. Matthew and Luke begin theirs with long genealogies and the Christmas story of Jesus' birth. John does nothing of the sort. Rather than giving the genealogical or historical details about Bethlehem, the innkeeper, King Herod, and all that, John chooses to begin with what it means that the Word, Jesus, came into the world. In the beginning was the Word, Logos, says John. In the beginning was the Word, writes John. The term Logos, for word, would be a part of the regular vocabulary of both Jews and Greeks. So John, in effect, is speaking their language by choosing this word. For the Greeks, it may have originated in the teachings of Heraclitus, who wrote around 560 BC and lived in Ephesus, where tradition says that John composed this gospel. For Heraclitus, logos came to mean reason as it shows up in people, or the principle of divine order which the universe continued to under which the universe continued to exist. The word was also used by Plato and achieved new currency around the time of the writing of the fourth gospel through the teachings of the Stoic philosophers. The Stoics were amazed at the order of the world. Order implies an orderer, a mind behind it all. The Stoics asked, what keeps the stars in their courses? What makes the tides ebb and flow? What makes day and night come in their predictable order? What brings the seasons around at their appointed times? And they answered, all things are controlled by the Logos of God. Logos was their way of referring to the ultimate ground of all things, the intelligence and power that sustains the universe. Wandering Stoic evangelists traveled from town to town, extolling the divine Logos, and preached the virtue of a life lived in harmony with it. To the Greeks, John seems to be saying, for centuries you have been thinking and writing and dreaming about the Logos, the power which created and sustains the order of the world, the power by which one might come into contact with the divine. Well, have I got good news for you. In Jesus Christ, the Logos has come to dwell among us mortals. We have seen his glory. In the beginning was the Word, the Logos of God, and that Word, that divine Logos, is Jesus Christ. He actually came to live among us. Now, the Jewish conception of the Word was somewhat different. In Hebrew, the word for word was dabar. The emphasis was not so much on the contemplation of a divine principle of reason, but it is much more active. To Jewish thought, a word was much more than merely a sound uttered by a mouth or written down on a page. It was something which had an independent existence and actually did things. Words do things. To understand what they meant by word, we almost have to link it up with the term deed. In the Bible, the Word of God always does something. God created the world by a word. And God said, and it was so. We keep reading in Genesis. Psalm 33 says that, by the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and all their host by the breath of his mouth. By the word of the Lord the prophets were sent forth. For the Jews then, the word meant energy and movement and action rather than merely thought and contemplation. For the Greeks, nouns and verbs and adjectives were of primary importance. For the Hebrews, verbs were of primary importance. Thus, the Bible is not so much interested in describing what God is. Who among us could presume to do that? As it is to proclaim what God does. The Bible is a poor book of philosophy. It was not written for that purpose. In it you do not find cataloged the attributes of God, but rather the story of what God has done, is doing, and will yet do. What power, then, is in words? Think of the words we use which do things. I love you. I hate him. I forgive you. What power there is in words. When St. John uses the term word for Jesus Christ, he indicates that revelation and communication are part of the essential nature of God. Bible scholar Frederick Buechner says, God never seems too weary of trying to get God's self across. Word after word he tries in search of the right word. And so to Jews, his own people, John is saying, what the psalmists and prophets of old heard and repeated in the name of God has now been set forth on the stage of human history in the words and life of a Galilean teacher. In the beginning was the Word, and that Word has now become flesh and dwelt among us in Jesus. That Word, that Logos, that Debar is Jesus Christ. Maybe you've heard the story of the little girl who was busily sketching on a pad when her parents asked her, "What are you drawing?" And she said, "I'm making a picture of God." And her parents said, "Nobody knows what God looks like." And the little girl confidently replied, "They will when I get through with this picture." Well, when Jesus Christ got through, we did not know what God looks like, but rather God is like, which is much more important. Jesus told us, and even more importantly showed us, that God is love. Because of Jesus, we know what God is like. A man once wrote to Albert Einstein asking him if he could possibly describe the theory of relativity to him in simple terms that a layperson could understand. Einstein replied that he could not do it as the man requested, but if he would call on him in person at Princeton University, Einstein would play it for him on the violin. God replied to our human longing for a glimpse of God by playing it on a human life. And the Word became flesh and lived among us. Because of the incarnation of the living God in Jesus Christ, we have come to know that God is a verb, the infinitive of which is to love. The Word became flesh and lived among us, and we have seen his glory, the glory as of a Father's only Son, full of grace and truth. So says John's Gospel. These are just about the most shocking words in the Bible. John was writing to counteract the mistaken notion that the God of creation and the God of redemption were two different gods, and that God would never become involved with anything as crass and materialistic as this fallen world in which we live. Against that heresy, John says that this world is good because a good God created it, and it is doubly good because God sent his Son into the world to redeem it. That is the way it is with God. God is love, but it is in the nature of true love to do something, to reach out, to communicate. A word is not a word until it is spoken. And in Jesus Christ, Christians believe that God has spoken, or maybe sung. When the Word was born to live among us, the Bible tells us the angels sang. Right now, as we continue to live through the pandemic that is COVID, many of us have had our despair deepen when we heard that singing with others outside our own bubble, singing in choirs or in worship or at live concerts together, was a particularly easy way to transmit the virus. Still, Now that the initial shock of that announcement has subsided, we have found ways to create music safely. And we invite you to sing along from the safety of your home, because music is a gift of God we especially need when we are lonely, or when we are trying to be brave, or when we are trying to keep going. We need music. And for many followers of Jesus, we need to sing. Music enables us to express what we are feeling or thinking without having to grope for the words. Many songs we sing are prayers that are, in some ways, immediately answered in the way they lift us up, move us forward, and help us to find joy. And so, as we begin this new year, 2021, together, I propose that we think of how we might choose our words more carefully, realizing they have the power to create. And I also propose that if you have not been singing because you feel awkward singing along at home with just you or maybe your family around, that you gather your courage and join in the song. Whenever I do this, I am surprised that I feel less alone, and that I have a sense that I am connecting with people throughout the world who I may not be able to see. Words have the power to bring life and light, healing and hope to this hurting world. We are invited to be part of God's redeeming work by speaking things into being. And when we sing them, perhaps we connect not just with this world, but with the spiritual realm where angels gather around the throne of God day and night, singing praises to the divine, who is so much more than words alone could ever adequately describe.
Up above my head, I hear music in the air. Up above my head, there is music in the air. Up above my head, I hear music in the air. All in this room, there's music everywhere. There's music in the air. All in this room, there's music in the air. All in my house, there's music everywhere. Early in the morning, there's music right there. Music right there. In the evening too. There's music in there. You know that angels sing music. They sing about Jesus when he was born in Bethlehem. It was a black lamb born in there.